Hey there, super sober heroes. It's your host, Sober Steve, the podcast guy. And before we jump into today's episode, I want to take a brief moment to ask for your help to shape the future of Gay A. Over the years, this podcast has grown and evolved as I've grown in my sobriety. And recently, I've been investing wild amounts of time, money, and energy to find ways to level up this podcast so it can get heard by the people who need to hear it. I want to take a brief moment to check in with all of you, though, to see what you love about the current show and what could be better as I'm growing and moving forward. In the show notes is a 3 to 5 minute survey for you to complete. I kindly ask that you pause this episode and take the time to complete it if you haven't already. You are kind enough to give me 20 to 40 minutes of your time each week when you listen to these episodes, and I want to make sure it's time well spent. So please let your voice be heard. Thanks, SoberPod, and enjoy the show.
I work in recovery. I talk to people every day, and I'm trying to get them to start their new journey, their new life, and they don't see any value in it. What I mean by that is people will tell me all the time, they'll say, hey man, I tried the 12 steps. It didn't work. I say, okay, can you recite all 12 steps right now and tell me how you used them today? I would like to hear that so I can help you try to figure out what's not working. And they go, no, I can't. I go, wait a minute. So hold on. You mean to tell me you can recite all of the lyrics to your favorite rap artist or country artist right now, album for album, song for song, and probably go on for hours? You can recite all of that right now without looking at a lyric sheet, but you can't recite to me 12 sentences that'll save your life because you don't see any value in it.
Hey there, Sober Heroes. It's Dr. Dallas Bragg from the Aftermath Podcast. I created this podcast to bring awareness to the crystal meth epidemic and provide resources for the loved ones of meth addicts. Check out episode 6, where I talk to Ignacio. He is the executive director of the nonprofit Controlling Chemsex. It's an organization out of London offering free counseling to gay men struggling with addiction, especially crystal meth. You are listening to Gay A, the Queer Sober Hero Show, and here is your host, the one and the only Sober Steve, the podcast guy.
Hey there, super sober heroes. It's your host, Sober Steve, the podcast guy, here with 1,063 days sober. And today I am grateful for my expanding sobriety community. In addition to that, I am also very excited to share with you my interview today with James Sweasy. He is an amazing guy who had a very powerful share and had a lot of great things to say about tips and tricks for staying sober and how to live an awesome sober life. I definitely think that he fits into the sober hero category, and I'm sure you will too. But yes, recently had the privilege of being on the Sobriety Diaries podcast with Podcast Nate, and it was a great chance to be on the other side of the mic and be asked some questions that I either haven't been asked before or haven't really thought on. One of which I want to expound upon today with all of you, because when I was on with Nate, we talked about what it was like when I entered recovery, with how I was ready to compare myself out of the rooms rather than identify with people's feelings. And so what it was like having queer spaces versus non-queer spaces, and how my view of that has evolved over my sobriety. But yes, back in the beginning, my early day counting, as many or all of you know, that my 12-step program is AA, and that's what I used to get sober. And when I started, I was very skeptical, as many people are, about a lot of the preconceived notions I had about what 12-step meetings might be like. I thought it was going to be a whole bunch of old white dudes in the basement smoking cigarettes and talking about how great it was back in the olden days. And sure, there are meetings like that exist, but those are not the ones that I go to. And we talked about that, how when I first started off in recovery, I needed a very queer, very diverse, very young, very progressive, like-minded group of peers that looked like me and talked like me and shared like me. And we even, like, in the meetings that I went to, like, changed some of the verbiage to make sure that it was like people instead of being gendered, and making sure that everyone was safe and welcomed. And those are the type of spaces that I got sober in. And I remember early on in recovery trying to go to a couple different meetings, and if it didn't feel as safe as that meeting did, like, I wouldn't stay, because at that point in my early recovery, I was so ready to run, not necessarily to drinking, but I was looking for excuses, and I was looking for ways to compare myself out. And so having the people who were like-minded and like me was something that I not only wanted, but something I really needed in early sobriety. And as I worked on myself and my program and my steps with my sponsor, my view of sobriety has always been pretty progressive with the way that I accept all routes of sobriety, but also just the fact that I can go to different meetings and they can have a gendered version, or it could be a meeting of a whole bunch of old white dudes. And I'm not going to automatically shut down and tune it out and think, who cares? What do they have to say? I can get the message now wherever I go. If someone is sober and wants to talk with me about sobriety, they don't have to be queer. They don't have to be young. They don't have to have a certain amount of time. They don't have to look a certain amount of way. I will talk about my recovery with anyone, whether you're sober or not, that wants to have an open, honest conversation about it. But that's one beautiful thing I've learned about my recovery that was radical at first. The idea that I can go to any meeting and hear something that I need to hear and feel better, or that I could go to any group of sober people and hear something I need to hear, has been really powerful to learn and embrace, because it's helped me realize that in the grand scheme of even outside of AA and 12-step relationships, but out in the real world, that it's not really about what makes us all different. It's about what we all have in common, and that's that most of us each day are doing our best on this earth to just get through it the best that we can without, with doing the littlest harm to other people as we possibly can. And are we always successful at that? Unfortunately not, but are we as a whole, as a humanity, like hopefully doing our best? I'd like to think so. I know that I am each day trying to do more help and healing in the world than I do hurt. And that's what it's about. And so that is a good lead in into my episode with James, because he is a amazing advocate and ally for the queer community. So he is another example of a guest that I'm having on. I've had on others in the past, like Jeff, who are allies that do a lot of amazing work for us, that even if they do not personally identify as LGBTQIA+, they definitely are sober heroes for our queer community and for the world at large. And so with that, I will let you head on over to my interview with James. Enjoy. Hey there, super sober heroes. It's Steve here with James Sweasy. Thanks for coming on, James.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm looking forward to it, man. Fire away, my friend.
Excellent. Well, what would you say is your favorite part of being sober today?
It has to be my family. I have to tell you, my wife, Elena, and I, we met in a homeless shelter 11 years ago, right? And contrary to what everybody believes, we did not date the first year that we met there, okay? They tell you to stay out of relationships. It wasn't that I was trying to stay out of a relationship. She just wasn't having it. So the full disclaimer, I would have dated her if I could have. But anyway, we started dating and we had this discussion about how she could not have kids. And I said, oh, me neither, right? And that was just an assumption. It wasn't told by a doctor or anything. It's like, look, I've tried in past relationships. There's absolutely a very huge chance that I should have kids, right? But I don't believe I can or whatever. And then it wasn't long after that, maybe 30 days after that conversation that we had about we can't have kids, or if we're going to date, we're just going to have to deal with it or adopt one day, that kind of thing. She popped up and said, I'm pregnant, and then we were pregnant for 9 months and had my first daughter, Ashlyn Sweasy. And then short time after that, I come home and Ashlyn is sitting there holding a note in her hand. My 1-year-old, right? It's holding a note in her hand, or she was 1 at the time, but she's holding a note in her hand that says, I pull it out, I open it. It says, Daddy, I'm going to be a big sister. And I looked over to what's now my wife. And I was like, well, what are we talking about? She's like, I'm pregnant again. Right. So yeah, I didn't think that I would ever be employable. I didn't think that I would get opportunities to be a family man and a productive member of the community the way I am today. And every day, man, I just wake up and I look at my girls, I look at my daughters and my wife and think, unbelievable. It's absolutely the favorite thing.
That is awesome. Yeah, I know that there was a lot I used to tell myself, like, oh, I'll never be able to do that. And sobriety has changed a lot of that for me. How would you say you're an ally to the queer community, and where does that fit into everything for you?
Oh, man. How am I an ally? Like, how am I not, right? I got to tell you, I'm a lot of things in this world, and my sexual preference is one small little piece of it, right? I'm a lot of other things. I feel the same way about you. I feel the same way about your audience. I don't particularly lead with my sexual preference whenever I'm talking to you or anybody else or anything like that. I understand there is a need for people to do that, because in the recovery community, you can get into certain types of housing. We house people based on compatibility, not necessarily gender identity. And that helps lower suicide rates. I understand that. But as far as being an ally, if you're a LGBTQIA person, right? If you're queer, you're self-describing as queer, that used to be a bad word. I used to not be allowed to say that. Okay. But if you're part of that community, you're needed. And I look at you as just another human being sitting right across from me, right? You know, the sayings in recovery, no fighting in the lifeboat. I can't stand it. The different factions of, especially when you get to the recovery community, like I'm a 12-step guy, right? And I'm going to tell you right now, I can't stand about half of the 12-step community. No offense. I'm not supposed to act like that, right? I'm partially joking, kind of. But there is all of these different factions that start popping up. And we look for the differences in one another to point out the difference. I'm different than you because of this, and now let's argue about it. I'm just going to look at the similarities. When I was first starting in my recovery, first of all, I've never cared about another person's sexual preference. I think it's one of the conversations that if you're not queer, you need to stay out of it unless you're invited to the conversation, in my opinion. You know, and we were working in South Florida, one of my first jobs in addiction recovery, and there's a place down there. Hope you don't mind me plugging. It's called Inspire Recovery. She's wonderful, right? Donna is her name. And that's where I learned that piece where they housed based on compatibility, not sex or gender identity. It's just, can you get along with this person, right? And they knew, as in most places, that sexual activity was going to happen, right? But rather than punish for it and kick people out and this and that, at least back in this time, this is 8 years ago, they said, let's have a conversation about it and what's appropriate for when and why not, right? As opposed to you're kicked out because of that, right? And going through a training with them, they will actually go around to other treatment centers and train you to help people. It just give you info. And some of the info that they gave us was that even giving a person, let's say somebody comes in and says, okay, I'm trans, right? The first reaction of people that are trying to be supportive in many cases is to be like, okay, we'll give you your own room. Maybe we can do that. And Inspire Recovery come and tell you, no, now you're treating them differently. So if you want to be friendly and you want to house based on compatibility, the center that I got sober at, it's a large free center. It's called the Healing Place here in Louisville, Kentucky. They do the same thing. And I just really started to look at it. And then if it lowers suicide rates, I'm all for it. And whoever's listening to this, whoever does listen to this, you and I are the same, right? We have the same problem and the same solution, maybe with different trauma. Okay. I'm not going to pretend to understand what it's like to grow up to, what did you call it? Coming out, right? And telling your family about it. That's got to be devastating. That's going to be hard. Okay. I'm not going to pretend to know what that's like, but I've got some other trauma and stuff I've been through that probably made me feel very similar. I was not happy with who I am. Okay. I was very insecure about a number of things, very insecure about how I look. I couldn't get along around crowds. I'm a heterosexual male. I didn't know how to talk to a female, right? I have trauma. But if I'm just saying it's something directly to your audience, man, you matter. I care about you. And you and I have the same problem. And in my opinion, we have the same solution with different trauma. We can start by not drinking and not using right now. And then we can go through these processes by which we clean house, do an inventory. We start to look at our own behavior. You know, as I go through the steps all the time with people. And I'm like, you know, whenever you get into 6 and 7, you get into these character defects and the shortcomings and this and that. It doesn't say anything about gender identity or what your sexual preference is. Matter of fact, if you're a guy, it says God and God alone can judge your sexual conduct, right? So when I did my 4-step, whenever we got to sexual conduct, my sponsor said, I want you to sit down and write out your sexual story. I said, what do you want to do with it after that? He's like, nothing. I'm going to sit you in a chair right there and you're going to have a conversation with your higher power about it because I'm not allowed to judge you on it. Same over here. I'm not allowed to judge. Not that I would want to. I'm sorry. That's the long way of me telling y'all, like, man, we're all in the lifeboat together, right?
Yeah, I love it. And it's as my podcast has grown, my views on that have grown, because when I got sober, I've really was still very close-minded to a lot of things. And I was ready to compare myself out of the rooms almost. And so it was finding the queer spaces that worked for me to get started. But now I can go to a meeting, like you said, because we all have the same goal, which is to stay sober and to help each other stay sober. And so as I've learned that lesson, I've been bringing on occasionally, people that are allies or, that have amazing messages like yours. So why don't we jump right into it then and tell us a little bit about your road to sobriety?
Sure. Your audience and I have the same problem, same solution, in my opinion. Others need outside help. There's certain types of medication, all that. I don't want to generalize everything, but same problem, same solution. Right? Like, I use narcotics and alcohol to change the way I feel because I don't like something. I don't like me. I don't like you. I don't like the environment around me. So the only solution I had was to use drugs or alcohol to change the way I feel. Now, when I look back on me as younger, me in high school and things of that nature, right? I always tell this story about, man, I could not get along. I did not like authority. I did not like teachers. Still don't like people telling me what to do. That's like a fat, you know what I mean? But man, I tell you what, you put me in a room full of people, particularly females. I'm a heterosexual male, right? But even just guys, you put me in another room full of guys. They're all full. I'm 100% sure that all of you all know exactly what you're talking about. And the moment I open my mouth, I'm going to make a fool of myself, right? I just lack the confidence. All the guys in high school and this and that, they're either the football team. I cannot play sports. I don't know anything about sports. I don't follow them. I couldn't walk into a group of ladies and use my personality to get their attention or talk to them and be likable in any type of way. But man, that car. And then, it goes the first time you smoked weed behind the gym, that crowd, to the first time you're out and somebody says, hey, my parents have this bourbon in the bar over here. Let's go drink some. I start hanging around with those people. So now I'm not hanging out around the cheerleaders and the football no more. I went and sought out my people. And I learned very early on that if you can get your hands on alcohol, and marijuana is where it started, which grew into cocaine, opiates, ecstasy, all that. But if you can get your hands on it, now you all have a reason to like me, And I finally found a way that I could fit in. I could walk into a room. Now I have something to talk about. I feel important. All of you all like me and I feel needed. Okay. So that started a process by which I always put a disclaimer out there. I'm the worst drug dealer probably in the history of the planet. I'm not very good at it, but I was able to get a discount. That's the way I always describe my drug dealing times. Cause my first felony was for trafficking. My only felony was for trafficking narcotics when I was 19 years old. I got caught in Kentucky. It's over 8 ounces under 5 pounds is one of the measurements they use. I got caught with over 8 ounces under 5 pounds, which was felony trafficking, right? But that quickly escalated into trying cocaine out in the clubs. And then, of course, I always wanted to know, where do I get more? Where do I get bigger quantities? I always wanted to buy in bulk because walking in and selling it, it's not that it was this big money maker, man. It made me feel important. It gave me purpose. And so, yeah, that's pretty much like how all that started. And, the weekend warrior, drinking every weekend when I go out, I did pretty well for myself. And I went to college and I did okay. I should say that. It took me a long time to get through college, but I did okay business-wise. I started a concrete company and a landscaping business when I was in my 20s. I built my first house in my 20s, which quickly became the party spot, right? And at some point, right as I was just moved into that house, I'd been out partying, drinking, doing cocaine, this and that. I'm driving in this little Toyota pickup truck I owned that I used to run my little business. And I'm just flying down this road. And this lady in a big black Expedition pulls right out in front of me. Just right. And I slammed into her. I mean, T-bone. Didn't have a seatbelt on. Face goes through the windshield. Truck end over end into a ditch next to the road and threw me out. Okay. The only thing I really remember other than seeing her truck pop up and knowing everything went wrong. That's all I remember, seeing the truck pop up in front of me and I knew I was going to hit it. And the next thing I remember, I'm laying in a ditch looking up and it was her. It was the lady that was driving. She was crying and saying, I'm sorry. Right. And there was ambulances there and they were loading me to an ambulance and taking me off to the hospital. My face went through the windshield. It ripped my lip right here off of my mandible. You could pull my lip down and see my jawbone. I had glass. It took them hours to pick the glass. You're not up close to me right now, but I have all these little scars everywhere around here. And then my lip on the left side of my face, my lip doesn't move right here very well, where my teeth went through my lip. I'm telling you all this because that's when I was introduced to opiates. Okay. I was in that horrible accident. They wrapped my face up and put all these bandages on me. And I have now what I call my paperwork, right? I have MRIs, I have images, pictures, police reports, and all that to prove that I was in this horrible accident that ripped my face apart. I need those pills. You feel me? So they gave me a bottle of Watson 540s, right? And I remember going back and taking them for the pain to go away. But then pain pills acted differently on me. I know some people will do opiates, use opiates and nod off, catch a nod, that kind of thing. I don't do that. It's the opposite effect on me. When I take painkillers, I will clean this entire house top to bottom. I will go out and mow the grass. You know what I mean? Yeah, you saying, you get what I'm saying? It gives me this energy burst where now, remember I was telling you, like walking into those situations with those people, with those, wherever it was, a crowd of people where I didn't feel like I fit in. Now I was Superman. I take those. I had everything in the world to say. I was high. I probably looked like an idiot. I'm sure I did. But I learned to use those pills to make my life fun. That's what it came down to. I felt like I was having a good time. I remember taking one Loratab in the morning and it would last me all day. Right. And I would just go and go and go. I'd be at the construction company. I'd be wheelbarrowing, shoveling, gravel, and everybody's like, oh my God, this guy, he works nonstop. You know, I remember thinking like, we should give these pills to everybody. We would have the most productive company ever on the planet. Everybody, because it makes you feel so good. I didn't know the dangers of them at the time. Then it became where I could take one in the morning and then, it'd start to wear off. So by the time I got home at night, I'd have to take another one. Right. So I'd take one in the morning, one at night. Then as my tolerance built, I would have one in the morning, one in the afternoon, one at night. Okay. Then I would take 2 in the morning, 2, 2 and 2, 3, 3 and 3, 5, 5 and 5, 10, 10. Haven't even ever take 10 in the morning, 10 in the afternoon, 10 at night. I've taken 30 to 40 painkillers a day to maintenance my opiate habit. Okay. And these are Watson 540s, right? The Loratab 10s. And eventually, but I had my paperwork. Okay. This is where I could walk into doctors and say, look at this stack of paperwork. Look at my face. Look what happened to me, my neck, my back, all this, I herniated disc. I need this medicine. Right. And back in the day, 13, 14 years ago, that worked. They would just throw a bottle of pills at you. They don't do that anymore. And I would eventually spiral out of control.
And so you have these papers that help kind of make it okay, and they're giving you the pills as you're increasing your dosage. When did it become a problem that needed to be addressed?
So I could not stay sober. I ended up in downtown Louisville, Kentucky, in this little shotgun house where they rented rooms to people. And I rented one of the rooms, right? And my mom rented one of the rooms. You see, I almost lied to y'all. I made it sound like I had money right there. You know what I mean? But my mom rented one of the rooms and let me stay in it. And it wasn't long before I was back on. You couldn't get the pills no more. So I started using heroin. I started experimenting with heroin. I started using it, snorting it, occasionally injecting it. And I drank every day and always had a story from my mother. And what I was doing was I was calling my grandmother who lived in Tampa the first time. I would call her several times a week with a sob story, and she would wire me $300, $400, $500 at a time. And one of the darkest parts of this part of my story anyway that I did is I knew at the time that my grandmother was struggling with Alzheimer's. So I could call her and ask her to wire me $300 or $400. And I knew she wouldn't remember doing it a couple of days later. And I could call her again and ask, and she would just do it. Now, she would just do it anyway, but I knew what was going on with her, and I manipulated that. And that's where my alcoholism took me, was to manipulating my grandmother's Alzheimer's to make sure I could get more money to continue my opiate addiction and alcoholism. So eventually, you know the story. I think we've all been there. You bottom out. Everybody stops enabling you. Al and I got a hold of my mother, stopped the enabling. I'm living in this shotgun apartment in downtown Louisville. And, I'm calling my mom, asking her for money. She eventually stopped doing it. My own mother told me, she said, son, I love you. I just don't like you. She said, you're not going to do this to us anymore. And they gave me an option. My mom calls me and says, hey, your aunt's out there. She will drive you to that place and get you some help. And if you go do it, I will help you when you get done. It's a year-long recovery program. Okay. And I said, I didn't have the other choice. It was freezing outside. It was January of 2013 in Louisville, Kentucky. There was a foot of snow on the ground. It was miserable outside. I chose to get in that car and go to the healing place because I was hungry and the heat was on. I did not choose to go because I wanted to be a better man, a better son, stop manipulating, lying, cheating, and using narcotics. I went because I had no other option. And I went down there and checked into that homeless shelter / recovery program, right? And I remember pulling up out front, and a guy had a badge on that said security on his necklace, on his lanyard. And I was like, pulled up out front. I said, "Hey, man, do you work here?" And I remember he goes, "Well, no, I live here." And I remember thinking, like, who says that? Who does that? How did you just admit that you live here at this dump, right? At this homeless shelter? It's not actually a dump, by the way. It was just but I was like, how do you admit that you live here? I had no humility about me at all, right? So I checked into the detox unit there, and it was concrete brick walls and the 4-foot high walls in between the beds. So there's 2 beds, a 4-foot high wall, 2 beds. So all 50 of us, or how many beds there were, in there together. Non-medical detox. They give you no medicine. You get a blanket, a big book, and they had food, unsweet tea and whatever food they were making that day is what you had. So I didn't have any other choice. I stayed there. At the time, I was a cigarette smoker. That's another thing I'm free from. I haven't used nicotine in years. But at the time, I was smoking cigarettes, and I was standing outside in this little area they call the dugout, right? Where people sit out there and, you just smoke and talk while you're going through these withdrawals. Well, I'm standing out there smoking, and they came outside and said, "Hey, if you guys have been here more than 24 hours, you now have to leave detox and walk across the street and go to a 12-step recovery meeting," right? I was like, okay, I'll go. Whatever. I'm bored. I was a little dope sick, but I was like, you know what? I'll get out of this room and head across the street. So I'm walking out through the cigarette out. I'm walking back through the building. And this lady, I love this lady. Her name is Miss Pam. I give her a shout out every time I speak about my story. Miss Pam was standing there at the desk in the detox. And as I'm walking by, she says, "Hey, you, 123. That was my bed number. Sweasy." She said, "Go make your bed." And I paused and looked at her crazy. I was like, "Lady, it stinks in here. Okay. That dude on the floor is naked. They brought this dude in handcuffs. I'm throwing up. This is a night. Why would I make my bed?" I was dead serious. Why? She said, "What are you here for?" And I said, "Well, I would like to have my family back, my car back, my job back, some friends, maybe a house, maybe a condo on the beach one day." That's, and she's like, "Okay, big baller." She said, "You want all of that responsibility, but you won't make your own bed." And I was like, "Damn it, man, you got me." It just deflated me in that moment. Then she hit me with the coldest thing I've ever heard in my life. You don't hear this in private treatment much. She said, "If you don't like it, you can leave. The door is not locked. We didn't invite you here. Nobody called you and begged you to come here. So go, beat it." In that moment, man, just in that moment when I got called out, she's right. I only made my bed when I was going to have a young lady over or something. Her friends were coming over. I spray a bunch of cologne around and vacuum up real quick, try to make the apartment smell good or whatever. And in that moment, man, it just hit me. I was like, damn it. Nobody's coming to save you. Mom's done. Dad's done. They cut my grandmother off, wouldn't let her talk to me. And that was it. It was me and a homeless shelter. That's all I had. And that place right there, that's also where I would meet what's now my wife, Elena. So yeah, that's the short of it, to be honest, right there. But then, we would then embark on, I walked across the street, I met a sponsor, and I started my 12-step recovery.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that so vulnerably and openly. Knowing like that, obviously some things have changed with recovery over the years, but a lot of it stayed the same. What would you say are tips that you used when you were starting off in recovery that are still true today?
Oh, man. A suggestion for a newcomer or a tip that's held true. I'll tell you what, man, like I always tell this story or, kind of tell it in this way, because here's the thing. People don't, in my opinion, don't stick and stay around the recovery community because you can't see the instant value in it, right? Now, I work in recovery. I talk to people every day, and I'm trying to get them to start their new journey, their new life. And they don't see any value in it. What I mean by that is people will tell me all the time, they'll say, "Hey, man, I tried the 12 steps. It didn't work." I say, "Okay, can you recite all 12 steps right now and tell me how you used them today? I would like to hear that so I can help you try to figure out what's not working." And they go, "No, I can't." I go, "Wait a minute. So hold on. You mean to tell me you can recite all of the lyrics to your favorite rap artist or country artist right now, album for album, song for song, and probably go on for hours? You can recite all of that right now without looking at a lyric sheet. but you can't recite to me 12 sentences that'll save your life because you don't see any value in it. If I told you right now that I would give you $1 million tomorrow in cash, if you had all 12 of those sentences memorized, you wouldn't get a wink of sleep. Nothing, because now you see value in it. You would pop up tomorrow and go, step one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. 2, came to believe, you know what I'm saying? Just bam, bam, bam. Sentence after sentence, you would spit it out, right? Don't lie to yourself. You know, we look around and say, oh, I tried. See, that's a lie. You're lying to yourself. A program is a set of instructions meant to bring about a desired result. Right? So we're going to follow this set of instructions, the 12 steps, which are meant to bring about a desired result, which is recovery, to gain stuff back, lost, stolen, or given away. Okay? Remember, go look up the definitions of words like that. Now you're light years ahead of me that was sitting in there saying I'm powerless over the disease and I was wrong. Okay?
Yeah, I can relate to that because it was a couple months in before, like, if God were sought. And I was like, I don't really know what that means. I thought, like, for the first couple of months that meant, like, if he so chooses. And it's like, no, you have to seek him. Like,
that's
it's
right.
Just, again, like, I didn't think to question what I thought I read, not looking up the words. So I love that advice.
Yeah. And you got to remember, too, another bit of advice is that it says in the beginning of that, or it says in the beginning of the closing, it says, our book is meant to be suggestive only, right? Mm-hmm. You go through it, you read, you learn. And just like I was telling some of your audience from the queer community or whatever before, like, look, we have same problem, same solution. You and I might have different trauma. Okay. But the 12 steps are going to guide you to ways to deal with your trauma. The 12 steps might not remove your trauma, but they're going to give you the courage to join the groups like you were talking about, where you found your group, you found your right people. It's going to give you the courage to walk through those doors and find those people. It's going to give you the courage to talk to whoever you need to. It's going to show you how to walk down this path. And as long as you don't drink or get high, we get to wake up and fight again tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that. And if people wanted to find you, what would be the best way to connect?
Oh, you could follow me. My name is James Sweasy. It's on the screen there, SWEASY. My Facebook page is just that. It just is James Sweasy, or my bigger Facebook page, the one that they call it a fan page. I hate thinking of it like that, but whatever. It's just my last name, Sweasy. So go follow there. I post a lot of free recovery content. I post stuff from the gym. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, all of that. So yeah, you know, everybody's welcome on my page. I don't discriminate or hate against anybody. I work in addiction recovery and we are abstinence programs, but I have a lot of people that follow me that are currently on Suboxone or Methadone or whatever. Please come be a part of the community. I'd love to see your comments. I'd love to have I'll just, join this journey together.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, James. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Back to you, future Steve. Welcome back, Sober Heroes. I hope you enjoyed my interview with James. He was a great guy. So make sure you follow him on all the socials, post some funny recovery related things, as well as some great motivation. And with that, also make sure you're following us wherever you're listening. I am at Gay Abe Podcast. I am most active on Instagram, but I do have a presence on all of the social media. So wherever you'd like, you'll find more of this. I look forward to seeing you next week, because you'd certainly already follow this podcast wherever you're listening. So you'll get our new episode next week with Eric from Sobervation. Until then, stay sober, friends.